Good news? I don't know. Recently. Yesterday, maybe.
Today when I got told I'd get 20 quid for an hour.
My best friend's having a baby girl.
No, I don't have any. You go first. No, you've got good news.
Baby slept through the night.
I think it was my GCSE results.
I found out I was getting a sort of a better job, I guess.
It was my brother getting into university.
I'm quite loud, so I'll just shout it to everyone.
Twitter, Facebook, stuff like that really.
With my friends, it's usually food.
Oh my God, guess what? You know?
Like I just tweet most of my stuff.
Jumping up and down.
I tell them face to face. I don't do like Facebook or all that sort of stuff, so.
Is it good news if you can't tell anyone, really?
I suppose all good news is worth sharing.
To make everybody else happy.
So people can celebrate with you, right?
Yeah.
The title of this talk is How and Why Should I Tell Others? Which, to be honest, feels a little bit like an unfinished sentence to me. Tell them what? Presumably it's not why and how should I tell others that I peed myself in primary school, which I did, or why and how should I tell others that it was actually me who let the dogs out. I presume that the end of the sentence is something like, why and how should I tell others that I go to church, or I go to Alpha, or I'm a Christian? I don't know where you're at in this course. Maybe you don't know what you think, and this talk is a bit full on. Maybe you do know what you think, and it's that you don't want any part of this, and therefore this talk is irrelevant. Maybe you turn up here in a wig every week so no one will recognize you, and you have no intentions of telling anyone, anywhere, anything, ever. If that's the case, that's totally cool, and I give you full permission to play Flappy Birds for the duration of this talk. I also don't know what your experience of religion is, if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I was immersed in religion as a child. My grandfather was one of the founders of a church that was set up because all others were unacceptable. And my mother, his daughter, subscribed to him and that church wholeheartedly, so it came home. Every single part of my life was affected, right down to the tiniest detail, and it was always very tightly controlled and towards the extreme negative end of the spectrum. Being deprived of social and relational experiences is one thing, but the deep scars really stem from concepts like punishment over discipline, God was wrath and anger, sin was the favorite and certainly operative word. Your eternal repercussions were on your shoulders from the moment that you had any awareness of that responsibility, in my case, when I was 4. You had this pressure that at any moment you could make one wrong move too far in any direction that would ensure a horrible forever destiny. Guilt surrounded me like a fog, and it might not surprise you to learn that I began self-harming, having suicidal thoughts, depression, and insomnia when I was 12 years old. I would lie awake at night with every bad thing I'd ever done running over and over in my head, and I would say sorry over and over again. But I knew God was wrath and anger, and I was just a child facing a seething, roaring ogre. At this point, you might well wonder why on earth I'm still connected to this faith and church in any way. I think that's a very good question, actually. I think that I have as good a reason as anyone not to trust God to walk away. I'd been told for years and years that he was one thing when in fact he was something else entirely. It might be like being told that your mother had abandoned you as a child and never wanted to see you, but in fact she tried for years and years, but they wouldn't let her near you. I understand that a lot of people think that God and this religion are one and the same, and so they avoid God because religion has made him their poster boy. And they don't want anything to do with any of it. Maybe you feel like that. I can certainly relate to that. I distrust religion, and I include Christianity in that. I distrust church. But I am convinced, utterly convinced, that there is a God of love and he sees me. You might wonder why I'm telling you all of this. It's quite depressing, really. It's because the title of this talk is Why and How Should I Tell Others? And my natural reaction is, I don't want to. Why would I want to do that? People will think my tagline is, I'm controlling, I'm intolerant, I manipulate, I judge. I'm sometimes ashamed to be associated with this. But I'm not ashamed of Jesus, and his love is incredible. And I want to tell others about that. And I came to that conclusion because I went on a very long spiritual journey searching for God. And I always had these two distinct voices in my head. One of the God of my childhood who screamed at me in a frenzy of rage. And then this other voice, this very quiet, gentle voice that whispered to my soul and called my name, and it felt like love. And over time, by completely disassociating myself from religion, I was able to shut up that angry voice and hear the whispered one. And I discovered God. And he wasn't found in religion, whether it was angry or neat. He was found in the messy, stormy chaos that he'd been wading through to reach me. And I discovered that he is love, and he is compassion, and he is grace. It's been suggested that there are three good reasons to tell others. The first is because Jesus asked us to, and that's recorded repeatedly in the Gospels. The second reason is because perhaps, we might look around and see people who are struggling, with a variety of things. Maybe they're struggling to find meaning. Maybe they're struggling with fear of death or religion or guilt. And I suppose rather than leaving them, it might be like being in a desert and finding water, and rather than just carrying on, it might be nice to tell people that it's there. If you think the water in the desert analogy is tired, I'm with you. It might be better to say that it's like finding an independent coffee shop on Clapham Junction High Street. Forget Starbucks or Nero or Costa. We have found Mrs. Brown's tea room, where she serves freshly baked scones in front of an open log fire. I ache for that too. I think that there's spiritual hunger everywhere. I think if you open your eyes, you can see it. You can hear it everywhere, in stories and poems and music and conversations. And that brings us to the third reason, which, believe it or not, the word gospel actually means good news. I know it sometimes isn't portrayed like that, but it is. It's good news that there's a God who loves us. There's a variety of ways of telling others. I suppose you could buy a sandwich board and write on it, "The end is nigh, prepare to meet thy maker." You could go to Oxford Street and accost people, and as they gush about finding a pair of jeggings for 12 pence in the Primark sale, you could growl at them to prepare to meet thy maker. When I was a young teenager, I decided to try a tactic to convert the lost, which I like to call snog to convert. And it wasn't an official church ministry, obviously. Although if it was, the 2 in the middle would be a number 2, because we're down with the youth. And the idea was, was very self-explanatory, which is that making out is a really good place to chat about faith and stuff. I had a very high success rate. I'm just kidding. There's this saying that the Irish never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and that's what I just did there. I embellished. There was once this one boy, and he was called Patrick, and he was from Glasgow, and he was such a bad boy and sexy as hell. And we used to, hang out. And one time I got very concerned for his soul. The church would have told me I should have been concerned for my own, but I was concerned for his. And so I very thoughtfully considered when might be the best time to have this conversation. And I very rationally concluded that, well, I suppose the next time we're snogging, because he'll be delirious and euphoric, and I'll tell him about God, and obviously he'll decide to become a Christian. But I got distracted, and I was afraid he'd stop snogging me if I started explaining the theology of transubstantiation. But we'll come back to Patrick in a bit. Fortunately for us, for you, Nikki has very helpfully come up with 5 suggestions for good ways to tell others. And if you like things that begin with the same letter, in your booklet you will find these 5 points alliterated with the letter P. Nikki obviously likes the letter P, hence Pippa. So here are Nikki's top tips. In the book of Matthew, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they might see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." And Jesus tells us here that we can make a difference in the world. And I think words aren't enough. And I suppose that to make a difference, perhaps something in us is different. Maybe we see things differently. Maybe we love our enemies. Maybe we're generous. Maybe we're kind. Maybe we're not obsessed with money or power. Maybe we make ourselves the least. Maybe we care about justice. Maybe we bring light to dark places or salt to rotten or bland things. William Wilberforce was 27, which is the average age of people in this room, when he sensed God calling him to fight the inhuman, degrading slave trade. And 10 million African slaves left Africa for the plantations in 1787. And in that year, he put down a motion in the House of Commons about slavery, and it was not popular. Bills were debated in, get ready for some dates, 1789, 1791, 1792, 1794, 1796, 1798, 1799, and they all failed. Finally, in 1833, the abolition of slavery bill was passed in both houses of Parliament, and William actually died 3 days later, after 45 years of persevering struggle on behalf of African slaves. And he's buried in Westminster Abbey. And Julia spoke last week about modern-day slavery, which is known as trafficking. And we all know that it is rife. But did you know that there's actually more people in slavery today than at any other time in human history, including in William Wilberforce's time? And we've all heard statistics from Oxfam and World Vision about poverty and AIDS. We know that they claim thousands of lives every day. Yeah, it makes us feel like that. I heard this quote recently. It said, "Sometimes I would like to ask God why he allows poverty, suffering, and injustice when he could do something about it. But I'm afraid he would ask me the same thing." We can do something about it. So let's be salt and light. I think as well as action, obviously our words matter. And there's a massive difference between pressure and persuasion. I know that I run a mile if someone tries to pressurize or force me into doing anything, probably because of my history. And despite what reality TV might try to tell you, it is actually possible to be a Christian and to be intelligent. We can converse and reason and discuss and persuade. In the book of Peter, he says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect." And Nikki spoke a few weeks ago about the historical evidence for Jesus, and it's really great to be able to talk about that. I've never met anyone who became a Christian as a result of a screaming argument. I've certainly never heard anyone say, "Oh, I met this really obnoxious Christian. We had this violent disagreement. Halfway through I said, 'Oh, you're so right. I better become just like you.'" I just don't think it works like that. I personally think it's really important to approach things aware of the fact that I don't know everything, and in fact, I don't know very much. And I also genuinely love hearing why people think the way they do and why they've come to the conclusions they have. You know, the best conversations I've had have been where we've been able to sit over a cup of tea and ponder life together and learn from each other, rather than me forcing them to sit down and shut up while I educate them on my superior beliefs. And also, one of the things that I think is most beautiful about God is that he's a mystery. There's so many things that we don't know, we don't have answers to. So let's not blag and pretend we do, but be honest, and in a way, let that mystery draw us deeper into God's beauty. Again, remembering that even in trying to persuade people, it's an act of love. It's not because we need everyone to agree with us or we need to control everything. It's because we love people and want them to experience Jesus. I was in Oxford recently for my birthday with my two favourite people in the whole world. And I'd been having my favourite sort of day in bookshops and drinking tea. And we thought we'd continue the peacefulness by going into the country and having a walk and eating food. And as we were walking through the town towards the car, we started to hear this racket. And it was someone screaming, practically snarling into a microphone. And two of us are very sensitive to noise, so we immediately put our hands over our ears and like, what is that? Shut up. And then we finally made out this one word, Jesus. And all three of us immediately stopped in our tracks and clutched each other and said, crap, it's Christians with a microphone. And we immediately 180s and went the opposite way, the long way around town in an effort to avoid the Christians. I guess I would call that being audibly assaulted against my will, and definitely insensitive and forceful. And a friend sent me this quote recently that says, holding the right position in an argument never justifies betraying the character of Jesus in our manner. Most people have heard of St. Peter, who's one of the heroes of the faith, but he actually heard about Jesus from his brother, and it seems like that's how it happens. Someone tells someone who tells someone. And in the book of John, it talks about someone called Philip saying to their friend Nathaniel, we found Jesus, come and see. And come and see is what we're saying to people. Come and see for yourself. Maybe you've got friends or work colleagues who've been wondering what on earth you've been doing on a Wednesday night. And maybe you could invite them to Alpha next term so they can see for themselves. When friends ask, you can tell them your story. A story is a hugely powerful thing. And we can debate about contradictions and suffering and all sorts of things, but your story is that, it's yours. You know, I had a friend who, in the nicest possible way, was quite self-absorbed, like me, I still am. And at one point, her faith really came alive, and she began to care very much about helping people who were suffering in the world. And she put herself through all sorts of misery in an effort to adopt. And I think that sort of change can't be forced. It was something in her had been convinced by Jesus, and it changed everything for her. In Thessalonians, Paul says, our gospel came to you not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit, and with deep conviction. Again, it's not just about our words and our actions. There's something that happens that involves the Holy Spirit. It's like that whisper I spoke about at the start, where I could sense something in me that was calling me deeper and urging me to look closer. In the book of Romans, it says, the love of God is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. And again, we're back to love. It seems it's everywhere. Paul also says, my heart's desire and prayer to God is that they may be saved. And Paul loved people, and out of that love came a desire to pray for them. And so often when someone comes to faith or their faith comes alive, we find that someone somewhere has been praying. And I don't know how it works, but there seems to be something that prayer is effective. I know that my friend Neil prayed for me that I would keep fighting to find God and wouldn't just give up and lump him in with everything else, but that I'd keep searching. You will sometimes get negative reactions when you talk about your faith. Sometimes people will think you've lost the plot, but that's okay. Really, it's okay. It's not your job to notch up numbers on the church's doorpost or bring converts. All you're doing is being love, bringing light, and in utter gentleness, sharing about something that has affected you, hopefully for the better. That's it. What happens after that is God's problem. You might remember I mentioned Patrick, the sexy bad boy Glaswegian. And in writing this talk, I started to think about Patrick and wonder where he is and what he's doing, if he's well and happy or serving 3 to 5 for GBH. Back then, I might have pitied him because he was lost. Ah, yes. The arrogance you will find in religion would shock you. There's this idea that you sometimes hear thrown around church circles that Christians have something that other people want. Sometimes they use words like purpose or identity and joy. Honestly, sometimes I have that, but sometimes I don't. There are plenty of people who don't subscribe to this faith who have better identity, more purpose, longer lasting joy than I do. Sometimes you hear that being a Christian or this faith thing stops you feeling anxious, or it makes you very well behaved. Yeah, again, sometimes I don't have that either. I get depressed, really depressed, and I mess up a lot, and not just the little stuff. I can see that something is shifting in me, something better. I can definitely see that. But I couldn't dare suggest for 1 second that I have it all together. I couldn't suggest that I'm special or I have some special thing that makes me in control and practically perfect. To be honest as well, I wouldn't really use the word Christian about myself. It just has too many negative connotations for me. I don't really know what to call myself, to be honest. I'm sure you could think of a few things. But apparently the early Christians, they were not called that. They didn't go around saying we're the early Christians. They were actually called the people of the way. And I like that. I'm just a girl trying to follow the way of Jesus. And there is nothing superior about me than people who aren't. There's nothing about me. But the thing is, there's something about Jesus. There is something about him that I find so completely captivating that it makes my face turn towards him and away from me and all my crap. I find him completely irresistible. He is utterly consumed by compassion and love and grace, and it makes all my junk just be silent for a moment. And in the middle of the chaos that is mostly just me, he is there. And that's what I've got in this faith. There's a love that I can feel even in the darkest and loudest moments. And that's what I hope Patrick has. I don't hope he's going to church or calls himself a Christian or is very well behaved. I hope that he's found this irresistible, captivating love of God. A few months ago, I was cycling home from work, and it was very dark and very busy with commuters. And I was coming over the Albert Bridge, concentrating hard on not getting rammed up the arse by the car behind, when the 3 or 4 cyclists in front of me stopped really suddenly one by one and pulled over to the left. And then I started to notice that all the traffic around me had slowed right down, and pedestrians were weaving through the traffic to my side of the road, and people had wound down their car windows and they were looking at something over me. And so I looked to my left, And there was the most enormous moon. You might have seen it that night a few months ago. It was really huge and really dark yellow, and it looked like it was just hanging in the skyline by a piece of string. And of course I stopped and joined the crowds because it was just such a sight. And I remember at one point feeling this grand connection with humanity, because I looked to my left and my right and I saw these faces, these human beings, all staring over the edge of the bridge together at this sight. Every individual's agenda forgotten just for a moment. Commuters who usually rush, just stopping and breathing and being in that moment, in awe of this sight that was so unexpected and beautiful and out of the ordinary. And after people had got over being stunned, they took out their phones and took pictures, and there's something in us that wants to share what we think is cool. You know, they weren't looking at this moon critically because it wasn't in symmetry with the shard, or pondering if Pharaoh and Ball just might possibly do that shade of yellow. It was something guttural in us that was reacting to it. Have you ever had that, where you feel that swelling in your chest? And of course I got my phone out and I tried to Instagram, but I just didn't do it any justice. The proportions just looked normal. It just looked normal. And I remember thinking, oh, it's such a shame that... And I thought of specific people because I thought, I can't describe this to them later. I won't do it any justice. And I thought of my friends. I thought of Stevie and Charlie and Sarah. And I thought, it's such a shame that they're not here to see this because they would love this. And I could imagine us all just standing, looking at each other going, isn't this cool? This is the coolest thing. I think that that's what Jesus does for me. He is so unexpected and so beautiful and so out of the ordinary that I am stunned and I just stare. And then I want to show someone, and I try to explain it, but I just don't do it justice. And so what I really want is for them to see for themselves, just to see. Because I think that very few people would see this moon and just go, meh. I think that most would at least admit that it's unusual. I want to call people over to the edge of the bridge and say, look at this, just look, really look. Because if they could just see for themselves, they would see how staggering this person of Jesus is. And they would experience his love that feels like a warm washcloth, gently wiping the muck and blood off your face. Thank you.